Hello, my name is Carl Smith, and I'm going to be speaking to you on the impact of social identity, especially in my English as a foreign language classroom in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. First, how do the social identities, the culture, ethnicity, and race of my students and in my classroom impact me, impact the students, and the school? So I teach at an all-Taiwanese elementary school in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. My students are 5th and 6th graders, and with the exception of one student who is biracial, they are all Taiwanese. The biracial student is African-Canadian and Taiwanese. So even that student only speaks Taiwanese and Chinese, and English is definitely his third language. So how do these social identities, the culture, the ethnicity, and the race impact us? First, the Taiwanese English learning model depends on a respectful change of ideas. The students and the teachers look to me to be an expert on all things Western culture, on all things English language. So I have to be respectful of the fact that they are looking to me to be their dictionary, if you will, of what is acceptable, what is proper, and what is good English. So I have to be real humble and respectful of that. And then I also need to look to them. So I say this in English, how do you say it in Chinese? So in English, it's okay to say XYZ. How is it in Chinese? So we have to have this partnership, or the dynamic of power is unbalanced. Second, Taiwanese culture is a lens that is foreign to me, but it's second nature to them, and they also have a difficult time often explaining it. So when I see something that doesn't make sense to my American, English, Western viewpoint, and I ask them to explain it, sometimes they're unable to. So I have to understand that there will be cultural and linguistic differences that may not be able to be explained to me. And I have to be okay with that. And I have to realize that it's not a moral issue of good or bad, but it's an issue of different cultures. And I have to leave space for the awkwardness and the maybe discomfort in not having a nice, pretty resolution to it. And I have to understand that that's okay, that in that space is where we can grow in our respect and understanding for each other. And the differences in the color of skin is very noticeable. When I walk into a classroom, when I walk into a school setting or professional setting, people automatically know, 他是外师, which is 外国老师, foreign teacher. So people can see it right away. I have a beard, I have the light skin, I have the dark hair, I'm much taller and bigger than most of the Taiwanese. So I have to understand that it's a little bit more cut and dry, if you will. And when I'm speaking with someone, I have to realize that their first reaction is a very visceral reaction to how I look, how I hold myself. Do I look them directly in the eyes? And so I have to dial that back. I can't hover over a student like I would in America. When I taught in America, I would go and maybe put my hand on the back and kind of lean down and whisper. That can be very concerning to some of my students, especially to some of the girl students. So I tend to take a lower stature. I tend to squat a lot or actually sit on my knees next to them or keep proximity but not be touching them. So all of these differences in how I look and how I appear show up in the way that I walk around the classroom and I walk around campus. I also always have to have a smile on my face because I know that if I don't have a smile on my face, it can be misinterpreted. And I carry the responsibility in my school of managing that. I don't expect my fellow teachers or my students to do that. And then I need to understand that these students are coming from very different worlds than me. Not only do they speak multiple languages already, they also live in huge families, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people in their homes. Many of them live where their parents run a business. So in front of the house is where they sell tea or food or what they call betel nut, which is kind of like cigarettes here. And they live in the back. So many times they're coming home from school and they're sitting down and they're covering the shop. And so their live, work, family, language environment is very different than anything I've ever experienced. So I think for me, the biggest way that the social identity impacts me is I go, whatever discomfort I'm experiencing, whatever frustration I'm experiencing is probably the result of a social identity issue. And I am slow to cast judgment or to make some sort of change because of that. What assumptions do we make about people from different races, ethnicities, and cultures? Now, I am going to be answering this prompt specifically to my experience in Taiwan. The Taiwanese idea of the Western world does impact my teaching. They have an affinity for Western music, for movies, for television. And so I walk into a classroom knowing that they have made a lot of assumptions. Americans are unhealthy. Americans are loud and obnoxious and rude. These are things that I hear from them. Even though they aspire to learn the language and to be comfortable with the environment, these are some of the assumptions that they carry. They've showed up in conversations with my coworkers. And so when I walk into any situation, I know that there's a number of assumptions. So I'm careful to say, one of the phrases I say the most in my class is 有的时候, which means sometimes. And then I'll say, but not always. Like, for instance, me, I do things differently. So I walk into those assumptions and try to dispel them. And also, I tend to phrase my assumption in a way that allows for people to correct me. For example, I will tell my supervisor, my coworkers, I notice a lot of children doing blah, 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 blah. Does that mean that in Taiwan, blah, 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 blah? And that has really helped to create a lot of opportunities for discussion. And it keeps me from actually making the assumption. So I focus more on observations than assumptions. And these assumptions influence the stereotypes. And I just have to be very careful of the stereotypes and be mindful of the fact that the students are also going to be stereotyping me. And the responsibility of respectfully presenting diversity is mine. So if I put forth a white, Anglo-Saxon, Republican, uneducated view of America, that's what they're going to see. So the assumption, the power of the assumption can be dispelled if I bring about diverse people when we read materials in class, when they listen to our listening homework, if I can get a variety of accents and voices, then I can help to present a more diversified Western English American perspective. And how I discuss the assumptions and issues is also important. Again, I try to frame it in the context of an observation. And I do not let the assumption keep me from expecting something from the students. So I try to turn those assumptions into something that is more useful. So rather than assuming they can't, or assuming they won't, or assuming they don't, I say, well, here's what I want from you. Here's what I think you can do. Here's what I expect of you. So in our text, we have this powerful quote about transitioning from assumption to expectation. We have to remember why we became teachers. And if the answer is to help children learn and achieve, we must deeply consider the impact of our assumptions. Rather than lowering expectations based on the assumptions, we must raise our expectations. And I find myself doing this a lot. So linguistically, the children have a hard time with phonetics, and phonics in particular, maybe 4 or 5 sounds. And I've met many teachers who just say, oh, they'll just never get it. So the assumption is you can't do it because you're Taiwanese, you don't know, you won't. And so for me, it's like, no, we're going to run headfirst into this situation, and I'm going to expect everyone to demonstrate that. So we start every class with tongue twisters. They particularly have difficulty with the theta sound, the. So we go this, that, the other, 3,333. I start every class with that because the expectation is that you can do it, and I believe in you can do it. And the reason I think this is important is because assumptions divide, whereas a unified expectation will bring people together. So assumptions say, well, you can't, but he can. So that's obviously two groups, where the expectation is that everyone, now we're on the same page. Assumptions exhaust you, like, oh, I think they might be this way. I think they have trouble with this. I think that they can't do that. It's exhausting, whereas expectations kind of start everyone on the same ground, and we propel each other forward. We empower one another. Assumptions discourage critical thinking. Well, there's no sense in wasting the energy on you because you can't do it. Whereas expectations actually demand it. So here's the situation. Let's do it together. Assumptions point out differences, and expectations encourage collaboration. So yes, we are different, but when we have an expectation rather than an assumption, we actually encourage discussion, group work, and that dynamic of synergy. And assumptions are very us, them. Well, I'm this way, he's that way. It discourages conversation, whereas expectations are coming together and being very we-centric. We can do this. We can work together. One of the big issues in this week's discussion was the dichotomy between why some students achieve and some students do not. And what I see in my class is really three types of students. There is the eager student. He wants to learn English. He's working very hard. Maybe she's always doing her homework. She cares a lot. Then there's an uneasy student. They are smart, but they're unsure. They're not confident. And they want to try, but they're scared. And then there's the disinterested student who really can't be bothered. They have no interest in trying. They don't want to do anything else. And so what I do is I actually see each type as a culture relative to that own situation. So rather than say that it's an ability level, I treat it like a culture, like what's important to them. So the eager student, learning, confidence, those are important to them. The uneasy student has a quiet confidence, maybe not a confidence, but a quiet reservation about them, politeness, and that sort of thing. That's a value to them. And then the disinterested is gifted in other areas. So rather than saying, well, he doesn't care, so I'm not going to worry about him, I actually see that disinterested persona in my English class as a cultural phenomenon that I need to be respectful of and sensitive to. So seeing each type of learning and their opinions and personality towards English learning as a culture relative to their own perspective really helps me meet them where they're at. And it keeps me from falling into making assumptions or making judgments on the behavior that I see. I see it related to their culture, as having to learn yet another language, as having to learn something that is very difficult for them, and completely contradicting even their current culture. So that really helps in bridging that gap. And then knowing that there's eager, there's the uneasy, and there's the disinterested, that really helps me cultivate a curriculum that will meet them where they're at, how to reach that student in the curriculum. So the eager students take the lead. The uneasy get a partner, and the disinterested are able to really tackle English from their point of disinterest. So a lot of questions where they have to answer me. I let them answer me in Chinese, because if I can ask a complex question in English and get an answer in Chinese, I still think we're making progress. So again, it's cultivating the curriculum based on where they're at. Personal culture also. The hard work of embracing the student sentiment. So understanding that some are going to love English, some are going to hate it, and some are always going to be shy. It's a dedication to embrace that and let that actually drive my teaching method. The unwavering commitment to keeping equality at the heart of reform takes hard work, research, and creative thinking to never lose sight of the focus. So their Taiwanese culture, their Chinese language abilities, their Taiwanese language abilities, that is all very important to the work I do in the classroom. But I also want to go a step further and make sure that my equity is meeting students in their opinion and their personalities and perspectives to the curriculum as well. So I do not think that inequity, or should I say equity, allows me to forget about students who don't like the subject. So how do I reach them? I embrace that and I work from that first. Yeah, they don't like it, they're disinterested, but I still believe they can be successful. And why is it important to develop equity in my classroom? Equity is simply making sure that all students are as successful as they can be. That's really what it is. Wherever they're coming from, however they're starting in my class, making sure that they pursue excellence. Equity is promoting a student-centered environment and understanding how to scaffold instruction to support gaps for one student and extending the progression of learning for the student ready for more.